My brother Saul managed our family's cattle ranch for 9 years, and for 9 of those years, he was robbing it blind. I'm Lisbeth Nolan, forensic accountant. I get paid to find where money goes when people try to hide it. My own brother stole $347,000 from our father's estate while telling everyone in Sheridan, Wyoming, that I was the one bleeding the family dry. The cruelest part? I believed him. For years, I believed I was the problem. And then, one Thanksgiving, sitting at that old pine table in our mother's kitchen, I saw one number in a stack of ranch invoices that didn't belong. That one number started everything. It ended at a title company office. Saul on one side of the table, me on the other, 6 witnesses in the room, and a folder between us that he couldn't talk his way out of. If this is the kind of story that pulls you in, and trust me, what Saul did at that title company is something I still can't fully wrap my head around. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the part where my own mother chose his side, that's coming. And the part where Hector Palomino, the man who worked our ranch for 26 years, finally opened his mouth? You need to hear that. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always read them. Now, let me take you back to the fall of 2016, the week my father died, and the week Saul Nolan decided the ranch was his. My dad was Wade Nolan. He built the Nolan Ranch outside Sheridan from a 200-acre starter parcel he bought in 1981 with a VA loan and a prayer. By the time he passed, October 9th, 2016, the property was 1,140 acres, Angus cattle, hay operation, a modest hunting lease on the East Ridge. Nothing fancy, but it was paid off, it was profitable, and it was ours. Dad set up a family trust in 2003, equal shares, me and Saul, managed by whichever child stayed on the land. That was Saul. He'd been working the ranch since he dropped out of UW his junior year, knew the cattle, knew the fences, knew the irrigation schedule. I'll give him that. He wasn't lazy. Me? I left. I went to Montana State, got my accounting degree, passed the CPA exam, and ended up at a forensic accounting firm in Billings. I specialized in financial fraud, insurance claims, embezzlement cases, estate disputes. I was good at it, really good. But to my family, I was the one who left. Saul used to say it at every holiday. Not mean, exactly. Just this little dig wrapped in a joke. Lisbeth's too important for hay bales now. Or, must be nice, sitting in an office while the rest of us sweat. And everyone would laugh. My mom, Charlene, she'd pat Saul's arm and say, "Leave her alone, she's doing her thing." But the way she said it, her thing, like it was a hobby, like what I did wasn't real work. Dad never said that. Dad used to call me every Sunday night and ask about my cases. He didn't understand half of what I described, but he listened. He'd say, "You got a sharp eye, Lizzie. Don't let anybody dull it." I have this one memory I keep coming back to. Summer of 2014, 2 years before he died. Dad and I were sitting on the back porch after everyone else had gone to bed. The sky out there. I don't know if you've ever been to northern Wyoming at night, but there's no light pollution. You can see the Milky Way stretched across the whole sky. Dad had a cup of coffee, even though it was 10 p.m. He always drank coffee at night. Said it didn't keep him up. He pointed at the barn and said, "Your granddad built the frame on that barn in 1962. I put the new roof on in 89. Saul poured the concrete pad in 08. And one day, one of you two will decide what it becomes next." Then he looked at me, not at the barn, at me, and said, "But Lizzie, whoever runs the money, runs the ranch. Remember that." I didn't think much of it at the time. I think about it every single day now. He died on a Wednesday morning, October 9th, 2016. Heart attack in the barn, right next to that concrete pad Saul poured. Hector found him face down in the straw at 6:15 a.m. He'd been doing morning checks on a heifer that was due to calve. Hector Palomino had been the ranch foreman since 1990. 61 years old, quiet, built like a fence post, skin like old leather from 30 Wyoming summers. He drove Dad to the hospital in the ranch truck doing 90 on Route 87, but by the time they got there, Dad was gone. Hector called Saul first. Saul called me an hour later. Just said, "Dad's dead. You should come home." I drove down from Billings that night, 7 hours in the dark. I stopped once for gas in Hardin and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes just staring at my steering wheel. Then I kept driving. When I pulled up to the ranch house at 1 a.m., the porch light was on, and Saul was sitting on the steps with a beer. He didn't get up. He just looked at me and said, "Took you long enough." I let it go. People grieve differently. That's what I told myself. That was the beginning. The trust paperwork was straightforward. Dad had everything in order. That was his way. Color-coded tabs in a 3-ring binder he kept in the filing cabinet next to his desk. Saul was named as managing trustee since he lived on the property. I was beneficiary with equal share. Any sale of land or major expenditure over $15,000 required both signatures. Or it was supposed to. The first year after Dad died, I didn't look at any of the numbers. I was grieving. I was also working 60-hour weeks on a major insurance fraud case in Billings. 14 defendants, $2.3 million in false claims. My brain didn't have room for the ranch. And honestly, I trusted Saul. He was my brother. He was the one who stayed. He was the one who knew the land. He sent me quarterly updates. Just a 1-page summary, nothing detailed. Revenue from cattle sales, expenses for feed and equipment, a line for operational improvements. The ranch was breaking even, he said. Tight, but stable. The 1-pagers looked professional. Later, I realized his wife had formatted them in Excel. They looked real because someone who cared about appearances made them look real. I sent money. That's the part people don't know. When Saul called in February 2017 and said the hay supplier was raising prices and the ranch couldn't absorb the cost, I wired $8,200. I didn't ask for receipts. When he said the tractor's transmission blew in June, I sent $4,600. When he said the property taxes came in higher than expected, Sheridan County had a reassessment that year, he said, I covered $11,400. I did this because I felt guilty for leaving. Because every time I sent money, Saul's voice got a little warmer on the phone. Like I was earning my place. Like I was paying my debt for having the nerve to go to college and build a career that didn't involve hay. He said, "You owe us that much, at least." And I accepted it. Because when you grow up as the one who left, you'll believe almost anything if it lets you feel like you're still part of the family. And then came Thanksgiving 2017. The whole family at Mom's house. Her place in town. A small brick house on Coffeen Avenue she'd lived in since she and Dad separated the household when I was in high school. Saul, his wife, Mom, 2 of my cousins from Buffalo. I was helping clear the table when my cousin asked Saul how the ranch finances were looking. Saul leaned back in his chair. He always sat at the head of the table, even at Mom's house, even though it was Mom's table. And he said, and I remember this exactly, we'd be fine if Lisbeth hadn't already pulled $30,000 out of the trust for her apartment in Billings. I stopped. I was holding a serving dish, Mom's white one with the blue flowers that she only brought out for holidays. I looked at him and said, "What?" He didn't blink. "The withdrawal last March. For your apartment down payment." "Saul, I didn't withdraw anything." He shrugged. Just this little shrug. One shoulder. Barely a movement. "Well, someone did. And it wasn't me." I looked at my mother. She was wiping the counter with a dishcloth. She wouldn't look back. And that's when I understood. He'd already told her. He'd been telling her for months that I was the reason the ranch was struggling, that I was the one taking money. He'd laid the groundwork so carefully that by the time he said it out loud at Thanksgiving, it was already old news to everyone in that room except me. He said it so casually, not angry, not accusatory, just resigned, like he was sad about it. Like he wished I hadn't put him in the position of having to say it in front of everyone. And that delivery, that sad, disappointed, more in sorrow than anger, delivery, was so much worse than if he'd screamed it. My mother said, "Lisbeth, if you needed money, you should have just asked." I said, "Mom, I didn't take anything." She said, "Okay, honey," and went back to wiping the counter. She didn't believe me. Nobody at that table believed me. And the serving dish was shaking in my hands, and I had to set it down before I dropped it. I went back to Billings and tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself it was a misunderstanding, that the trust records would show the truth. I asked Saul to send me the full financial statements from the trust account. He said he'd get to it. He didn't. I asked again in January, February, March. Every time there was a reason. The accountant was behind. The bank was switching systems. He'd send them next week. In April 2018, I called the bank directly. First National in Sheridan. I told them I was a co-beneficiary and I needed statements for the Nolan Family Trust. The woman on the phone was polite. She said she'd need written authorization from the managing trustee. I said, "I'm on the trust." She said she understood, but the account had a managing trustee authorization clause, and she'd need Saul's written permission to release statements to me. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office for maybe 20 minutes after that call. I didn't cry. I was doing math. Not money math. Emotional math. How many times had Saul deflected? How many times had the excuse been just plausible enough that I let it go? This is what I do for a living. I trace money that people try to hide. And my own brother had been stonewalling me with the exact same tactics I see in fraud cases. The delay. The misdirection. I'll get to it. I see that pattern 3-4 times a month in my work, and I'd missed it in my own family for 18 months. If you know what it feels like to realize that the person you trusted most was running the same playbook you've seen 100 times, and you still didn't catch it because it was family, then you already know what I felt sitting in that parking lot. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been the last person to figure out what everyone around you was already doing? Because I was about to learn exactly how deep this went, and the number wasn't $30,000. I called my boss that afternoon, told him I needed to take some personal time. He asked if everything was okay. I said, "I think my brother's been stealing from my father's estate." He paused and said, "How much?" I said, "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." Here's the thing about forensic accounting. You don't start with the big picture. You start with one thread, and you pull it. And if the thread is real, it leads to another thread, and another. Most fraud isn't clever. It's just persistent. People don't get caught because they're smart about hiding money. They get caught because they get comfortable. My first thread was the $30,000 Saul claimed I'd withdrawn. I hadn't, but somebody had moved money out of that trust, and they'd used my name as cover, which meant there was a paper trail. There's always a paper trail. I drove to Sheridan on a Friday in May 2018. Didn't tell Saul, didn't tell Mom. I checked into a motel on Main Street, the Trail's End, $79 a night, a place I'd driven past 1,000 times growing up but never had a reason to stay in. I went straight to the Sheridan County Recorder's office and pulled every document filed under the Nolan Family Trust for the past 2 years. Property filings, lien records, UCC filings, anything public. What I found in the first hour made me sit down. There were 3 equipment liens I'd never authorized, 2 on a hay baler, and 1 on a skid steer that I later confirmed the ranch had never purchased. A $22,000 line of credit secured against the ranch's hay barn, drawn down completely, and a deed modification filed in August 2017, 1 month before Thanksgiving, that reclassified 40 acres on the western boundary from trust property to Saul Nolan, individually. I had to read it 3 times before I believed what I was seeing. He'd carved off a piece of our father's ranch and put it in his own name, without my signature, without my knowledge. The recorder's stamp showed a notary seal from a public notary in Ranchester. 15 miles away, where nobody would know the Nolan family, where nobody would ask questions. I don't remember driving back to my motel room. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed and the comforter had this pattern, brown and orange, very 1990s, and I was staring at the copies I'd made and thinking, this is what the families I work for feel like. This is the moment when the numbers stop being abstract and start being your whole life falling apart in a stack of photocopies. The next morning, Saturday, May 19th, I went to the ranch, not to confront Saul. I knew he was in Cody for a cattle auction that weekend. I went to see Hector. Hector Palomino was in the equipment shed, welding a gate hinge. The shed smelled like metal and diesel. He saw me and pushed his visor up and said, "Lizzie, wasn't expecting you." I said, "Hector, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He looked at me for a long time. He had this face, weathered, serious, the kind of face that doesn't give anything away until it decides to. Then he set down the welding torch and pulled off his gloves and said, "I was wondering when you'd come." That sentence, 5 words, and I felt every one of them, because it meant he already knew. It meant he'd been carrying something and waiting for someone to ask. Hector told me he'd been watching Saul for over a year. New equipment purchases that didn't match what the ranch actually needed. A 0-turn mower for a cattle operation. A $6,400 portable generator that lived in Saul's garage, not the ranch's equipment shed. Cattle counts that didn't add up. Hector kept his own tally. Always had. And last fall there were 14 head unaccounted for. A brand new Dodge Ram 2500 that Saul said was a ranch expense, but that never once hauled a trailer, never once carried a hay bale, never once got a scratch on its chrome bumper.
Hector said he'd tried to bring it up once, January 2018. He'd gone to Saul's office in the ranch house, the room that used to be Dad's study, and said, "Saul, the numbers on the cattle report don't match what I'm seeing in the pastures." Saul looked at him and said, "Mind your own business, old man. You work here. You don't own here." And Hector, this man who'd worked for my father for 26 years, who'd found my father's body, who'd driven 90 miles an hour trying to save his life, just went quiet after that, because he was afraid of losing his job. The only job he'd had since he was 35, the only home he'd known. I didn't blame him. I wanted to. Part of me did, for about 30 seconds. But I looked at this man standing in the shed where he'd spent more hours than most people spend in their houses, and I thought about what it costs to speak up when the person you're accusing signs your paycheck. "How much do you think he's taken?" I asked. Hector shook his head. "I don't know the money part, Lizzie. That's not my area. But I know he sold 14 head of cattle last October that never showed up on any books I saw. And I know that truck cost at least $58,000, because I saw the dealer sticker on the window when he drove it home." That was my second thread, and it was thick. I spent the next 6 weeks doing what I do best. I traced every transaction I could access. Public filings, county records, UCC liens. I cross-referenced equipment serial numbers from the ranch with dealer records. I tracked Saul's personal vehicle registrations through the DMV. I pulled cattle brand inspection reports from the State Livestock Board. Every legal sale in Wyoming generates a brand inspection document, and those are public. By the end of June 2018, I had a spreadsheet with 47 line items. 47 separate transactions where money had moved from the ranch trust, from ranch operations, or from ranch assets into Saul's personal accounts or personal property. The total was $289,000. And that was only what I could document from public sources. The actual trust account, the one Saul still wouldn't let me see, was almost certainly worse. Now here's what I want to ask you. If you were sitting where I was sitting, in a motel room in Sheridan with a laptop and 47 lines of your brother's theft staring back at you, what would you do? Go to the police? Confront him? Tell your mother? Because I thought about all three. And every option had a cost. If I went to the police, it was criminal. My brother in handcuffs. My mother's eldest son. The ranch in the news. If I confronted him directly, he'd deny it and destroy whatever evidence he could reach. And if I told my mother, well, she'd already chosen her side at Thanksgiving. I wasn't sure she'd believe 47 line items when she wouldn't believe me saying, I didn't take that money. Drop your answer in the comments. I'll tell you what I decided. And honestly, I'm still not sure it was right, because the thing that happened 3 weeks later is what broke me wide open. Saul came to Billings. He showed up at my apartment on a Sunday afternoon. No warning, just knocked on my door. When I opened it, he was standing there in that stupid ranch hat, smiling, and he said, "This is the one that still makes me go quiet when I think about it. You know, Lizzie, Dad always said you'd amount to something. I guess we're both still waiting." He said it with a grin, like it was a joke between us, like we were close enough for that kind of ribbing. And then he said he was in town, checking on some business, and wanted to take me to dinner, like nothing was happening, like he didn't know I'd been to the county recorder, like he didn't know I'd talked to Hector. I went to dinner with him. I sat across from him at a steakhouse on Grand Avenue, and I ate a $34 ribeye, and I smiled, and I asked about the ranch, and I didn't say a single word about what I knew. Saul talked the whole time, about the herd, about fence repairs, about how Hector was slowing down. He talked about the 40 acres on the west boundary, said he was thinking of leasing them out for extra revenue, like he was doing me a favor. He even asked about my job. "You still chasing other people's money, Lizzie?" He laughed at his own question, and for 1 second, just one, he held his steak knife at an angle, and the overhead light caught the blade. And it was the same gesture Dad used to make, cutting his meat with that same tilt of the wrist. It was so small, and it hit me so hard I had to look down at my plate. That was the hardest meal of my life. If you're still here, stay, because Saul's business in Billings, I found out what it was. And that's when the number went from $289,000 to something much worse. After Saul left Billings, I started pulling a thread I hadn't considered before. What business was he doing in my city? Sheridan to Billings is 3.5 hours. He didn't drive 3.5 hours to buy me a steak. I searched Yellowstone County business filings, and there it was. Saul had registered an LLC in Montana, Bighorn Valley Properties LLC, filed in March 2018, 3 months before he visited me. The registered address was a mailbox service on Broadwater Avenue in Billings, a shell company. My brother had set up a shell company. Now, I want to be careful here because this is where my professional training kicked in and my emotional brain had to step back. In my job, I see shell companies used for one reason: moving money where it can't be easily traced back to the source. Legitimate businesses don't need anonymous mailbox addresses in a different state. I pulled the LLC's filings. Bighorn Valley Properties had made one purchase, a 3-bedroom rental property in Laurel, Montana, for $187,000, paid in cash, 4 months after Dad died. Where does a ranch hand get $187,000 in cash? If you think that's bad, subscribe now. The number I just told you isn't even the final number. I didn't have to guess where the money came from. I already knew. The trust. Our father's trust. The one where Saul was the managing trustee with sole bank access. The one he'd been telling everyone I was draining. My running total went from $289,000 to, I had to double-check my own math, $347,000 and counting. And I still couldn't see the actual trust bank statements. For all I knew, there was more. I sat in my apartment that night, and I didn't move for a long time. I remember my cat jumped onto the table and knocked a pen onto the floor, and I just watched it roll. There's a version of this where I called the police that night. There's a version where I called my mother. There's a version where I drove to Sheridan and put that spreadsheet on the kitchen table and screamed until someone listened. I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I called a lawyer, an estate litigation attorney in Casper my boss had recommended. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting for 45 minutes. When I finished, she said, "Lisbeth, you have enough for a civil case right now. But if you want a criminal referral and you want to protect the remaining assets in that trust, you need the bank statements. And to get those, we need to petition the court." The petition was filed on July 30th, 2018. And Saul had no idea. Here's what happened next. And I want to tell this part carefully because this is where I had to decide who I was. Not who I was as an accountant, who I was as a sister, as a daughter, as Wade Nolan's kid. The court granted my petition on August 22nd. The judge ordered First National to release the complete trust account history directly to my attorney. Saul was notified. He had to be, it's the law. But by the time he got the letter, the bank had already sent the statements. Due process. He couldn't stop it even if he wanted to. My attorney called me on a Thursday morning, August 30th. I was at work in the middle of an audit for a client, an insurance company out of Great Falls. She said, "Lisbeth, I need you to sit down." I was already sitting. I said, "I'm sitting." She said, "The trust had $412,000 in it when your father passed. As of last month, the balance is $23,614. I had to excuse myself from my office. I walked down the hallway, past the break room, past the copy machine, past the framed CPA certificates on the wall, and I went into the bathroom and locked the door and stood there with my hands on the sink looking at myself in the mirror. $412,000 to $23,614 in 22 months. My father spent 40 years building that ranch. 40 years of 4 a.m. mornings and busted knuckles and Wyoming winters that freeze your nostril hairs when you step outside. 40 years of cattle prices going up and down, of drought years and good years, of replacing fences and patching roofs, and never once complaining about any of it. And Saul burned through the financial result of all of that in 22 months. Every dollar Dad earned with his hands, Saul spent with a pen. The bank statements told the whole story. Monthly transfers to Saul's personal checking account. $3,000 here, $5,000 there, sometimes $7,500 if he was feeling bold. The $187,000 wire to the Billings Title Company for the rental property in Laurel. A $31,000 ranch equipment withdrawal that matched the date of his Dodge Ram purchase within 48 hours. Payments to 2 different credit card companies totaling $18,600. A $14,600 transfer to a TD Ameritrade brokerage account in Saul's name. And the $30,000 withdrawal he'd blamed on me at Thanksgiving? It went to a contractor in Cody, Bridger Valley Construction, who remodeled Saul's kitchen. The one he showed off at Christmas. The one my mother stood in and said was, "So beautiful, Saul. You really have an eye." He paid for it with our inheritance. With our father's money. And then he sat at our mother's Thanksgiving table and told the family I was the one stealing. I don't usually lose my composure at work. I'm a forensic accountant. I deal with numbers and evidence, and I keep my feelings separate from my analysis. But that afternoon, I closed my office door and I cried. Hard.
for about 15 minutes. Then I washed my face and went back to the insurance audit. But here's why I waited. My attorney discovered something in those statements that changed everything. The 40 acres Saul had transferred to his own name on the western boundary, he hadn't just taken them. He was about to sell them. There was a pending purchase agreement, a buyer in Casper, a cattle rancher looking to expand. The contract was signed, earnest money deposited. Closing date? September 18th, 2018, 19 days away. My attorney said it plainly. We have less than 3 weeks. If that closing goes through, the land is gone and recovery becomes a federal matter. Saul was going to sell 40 acres of our father's land that he'd illegally transferred to himself. The sale price was $148,000. And nobody, not me, not my mother, not Hector, not any court, would have known until the deed was recorded and the money was gone. Unless someone was there when he tried to close. Would you have walked into that room, knowing your brother was on the other side of that door? Tell me in the comments, because I almost didn't. I sat in my car outside that motel in Sheridan the night before, and I almost drove home, because in 19 days, those 40 acres would have been gone forever. My attorney filed an emergency motion on September 4th, a temporary restraining order blocking any sale of trust property pending a full accounting. The motion included my 47-item spreadsheet, the bank statements showing $388,386 in unauthorized withdrawals and transfers, the LLC records from Montana, the forged deed modification, and Hector's signed affidavit about the missing cattle and unauthorized vehicle purchase. The judge granted the TRO on September 10th, 8 days before the scheduled closing. The title company handling the sale, Bighorn Title and Escrow on North Main in Sheridan, was notified directly by the court. Saul was not. That was the key. Saul was not notified about the TRO because the court found, based on my attorney's argument, that notification would give him opportunity to destroy evidence or accelerate other unauthorized transfers. It's called an ex parte order. I'd seen them in my fraud cases. I never thought I'd be the one filing for one against my own brother. So Saul didn't know the sale had been blocked. He didn't know I had the bank statements. He didn't know about the TRO. He didn't know about Hector's affidavit. He'd been operating for 2 years in a world where nobody questioned him. Nobody checked the numbers. And little sister Lisbeth was too far away and too guilty and too busy to cause problems. I drove from Billings the night before the closing and stayed at the trail's end again. Same room, same brown and orange comforter. I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the popcorn ceiling, and I kept thinking about all those months of silence, not saying anything at family dinners, not confronting Saul at that steakhouse, not calling my mother back. Silence isn't weakness when you're building the case that ends the silence. I think I needed to believe that. I needed it to be true. He walked into that title company office on September 18th at 1:30 in the afternoon like he was picking up groceries. I was there. I'd been sitting in that chair since noon, my stomach in knots, going over the folder one more time. My attorney was there, in a gray suit, calm as stone. She'd spent the morning organizing her documents, shuffling tabs in and out of order, until she finally closed the folder and set it flat on the table. The title company officer, a woman in her 50s who'd been closing real estate deals for 30 years, she was there, and she knew exactly what was happening. The buyer's attorney was there, because his client had received the TRO notification and wanted to understand the situation before walking away. And Hector Palomino, in a clean blue button-down shirt I'd never seen him wear, sitting in a wooden chair by the window with his hat in his lap. Saul came through the door in his ranch boots and that leather jacket he bought with trust money. He had a folder under his arm. He was smiling. He saw the title officer first and said, "Afternoon. Should be a quick one today." Then he saw me.
He stopped in the doorway. His hand was still on the door handle. "Lizzie, what are you doing here?" I didn't say anything. My hands were in my lap and my heart was going so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I let my attorney talk. She stood up, opened her folder, found the right page, then looked directly at Saul. Mr. Nolan, this closing cannot proceed. The property you're attempting to sell was transferred from the Nolan Family Trust to your individual name without the required co-beneficiary authorization. A temporary restraining order was issued by the 4th Judicial District Court on September 10th, blocking any sale of trust assets pending a full forensic accounting. Saul's face. I've replayed it 1,000 times. His jaw went slack first. Then his eyes moved. To me, to the title officer, to Hector by the window. His hand tightened on the folder he was carrying, and I could see his knuckles go white. And then something settled in his expression, something hard and deliberate, and I recognized it because I'd seen it on defendants in fraud cases when they realize the room already knows what they did. He said, "This is a family matter. Whatever Lisbeth told you, she's been trying to get her hands on this property for years. She's the one who's been taking money from the trust. Ask anyone." The title company officer looked at my attorney. My attorney placed a folder on the table. The court filing includes a complete forensic analysis of the trust account from October 2016 to present. 47 documented transactions totaling $347,000, all traceable to accounts in your name or entities you control, including Bighorn Valley Properties, LLC, registered in Montana under your name. Saul looked at that folder like it was a living thing, something that could bite him, and I watched him do the math. The same math I'd done 6 months earlier in that motel room on Main Street. Except his math was different. His math was, what do I still have? What can I still deny? What can I say that makes this go away? He tried. I'll give him that. He tried. That's not. Lisbeth has been trying to take control of this property since Dad died. She's manipulated the numbers. She works in accounting. She can make anything look like, my attorney said. The documents were compiled from public county records, state livestock inspection reports, Montana business filings, and bank statements released under court order. The court found sufficient basis to issue a temporary restraining order. The title company officer said, "Mr. Nolan, I need to ask you to stop." Saul looked at me and said, and this is the third thing he said that I'll never forget. "You're going to destroy this family over money, Lizzie." That's what Dad would say. He'd say, "You're tearing us apart for a few dollars." A few dollars. $347,000, and he called it a few dollars. My father's life savings, and he called it a few dollars. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I said 7 words. I said, "Dad would say, check the numbers, Saul." The room went completely still. The buyer's attorney cleared his throat and said, "I think we're done here." He stood up, shook the title officer's hand, and walked out. The deal was dead. Saul stood there. He stood there for a long time. His hands were doing this thing, opening and closing, like he was trying to grip something that wasn't there. Hector stood up from his chair by the window, and for the first time in 2 years, he spoke directly to Saul. "I watched you do it," Hector said. His voice was shaking. "I watched you sell your father's cattle and pocket the checks. I watched you drive that truck home and tell your mother it was a ranch purchase. I watched you sit at that Thanksgiving table and lie about your sister. I watched all of it, and I should have said something sooner. That's on me. But any songs about?" The title company officer asked everyone to leave. It was September 18th, 2018, at approximately 2:40 in the afternoon, and it was the last time Saul Nolan tried to super accounting that wasn't his. The next 72 hours went fast, but not the first hour. The first hour went slow. I sat in my car in the title company parking lot for I don't know how long. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I woke crying,
Not exactly. It's something else. Relief and grief tangled together in my chest, refusing to settle. I had just destroyed my brother in front of 6 people. I'd spent months building toward that moment, and now that it was over, I didn't feel victorious. I benefit out. I was taking laughing, quietly, and then my eyes were wet, and I sat there with the engine off until Hector knocked on the window and asked if I was okay to drive.
My attorney filed a formal complaint with the Sheridan County District Attorney's Office on September 19th, the day after the title company confrontation. Criminal referral for embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. The DA opened an investigation the same week. The forensic documentation was thorough enough that they didn't need to build a case from scratch. I'd already built it. 47 transactions, bank statements, county records, the forged deed, the Montana LLC. Every thread tied to a dollar amount and a date. Saul hired a lawyer out of Casper. His lawyer tried to argue it was a family misunderstanding and that the trust language was ambiguous regarding the managing trustee's expenditure authority. For about 30 seconds in that courtroom, I thought it might work. The judge was reading the trust document, turning pages slowly, and I could feel my attorney tense up in the chair next to me. Then the judge, a woman who'd been hearing trust disputes in the 4th District for 16 years, looked up and said, the language was clear. The co-beneficiary signature requirement was unambiguous, and the forged deed modification alone constituted prima facie evidence of fraud. But it didn't happen in one clean motion. The first hearing was postponed 3 days because of a scheduling conflict. Something about the judge's calendar and a criminal matter that took priority. 3 days of sitting in Sheridan with nothing to do but wait and second-guess every decision I'd made. My attorney told me it was routine. It didn't feel routine. The deed transfer was voided. The 40 acres went back into the trust. Saul was removed as managing trustee by court order on October 3, 2018. I was appointed successor trustee. Done. 15 minutes of the judge reading her order. 2 years of my brother's scheme, over in 15 minutes. The thing about small towns, and Sheridan is a small town, maybe 18,000 people, is that word gets around. The ranching community is tight. People know each other. People talk at the feed store, at the diner on North Main, at the stockyard on sale day. By the end of the first week, people knew. Not the details, but the shape of it. The Nolan boy, the trust money, the sister who found out. I heard secondhand that the owner of the feed store where Saul had an account, a tab running to $6,400 that he'd been paying with trust checks, called my attorney's office and asked if the trust was going to honor the balance. I called the feed store directly and paid it with my personal credit card. Because those are working people. They didn't steal anything. Saul's wife, I'll just call her his wife, she's not part of this story really, left him by Thanksgiving. I don't know the details, and I don't need to. She had her reasons, and I imagine finding out your husband embezzled $347,000 from his dead father's estate is reason enough for most people. She packed a car and drove to her parents' house in Gillette, and the divorce was filed before Christmas. The 2 ranch hands Saul had hired to help with the day-to-day, younger guys, mid-20s, one from Dayton and one from Ranchester, both quit when they found out their paychecks had been coming from embezzled trust funds. The one from Dayton called me to apologize. He said, "I didn't know, Ms. Nolan. I swear I didn't know where the money was coming from. I just needed the work." I believed him. Some people really don't know. Sometimes you're just standing downstream, drinking the water, not knowing what's upstream. My mother, I knew this was coming, and it still hit me. My mother called me on October 8th. She was crying. She said, "How could you do this to your brother?" Not, how could Saul do this to the family? Not, how could Saul steal from your father's trust? Not, how could Saul lie to all of us for 2 years? How could I do this to Saul? I held the phone and I closed my eyes and I breathed. And then I said, Mom, he took $347,000. He bought a house in Montana with Dad's money. He filed a fake deed. He was about to sell 40 acres of the ranch for $148,000 and pocket it. She said, He's your brother. I said, He's a thief. She hung up. We didn't speak for 4 months. The criminal case moved slowly. Wyoming's court system isn't fast. The state has one of the smallest judicial systems in the country, and everything takes longer. But in January 2019, the DA charged Saul with 3 counts of felony embezzlement, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of fraud. The total alleged amount was $347,000, though my own analysis suggested the real number might be higher once you included the value of cattle sold off books. He took a plea deal in March. 2 counts of embezzlement. Remaining charges dropped. 18 months probation. $347,000 in court-ordered restitution. And a felony on his record. A permanent felony on his record.
He didn't go to prison. Some people are angry about that when I tell them. I wasn't. Prison wasn't the point. The truth was the point. The ranch was the point. Getting back what Dad built was the point. Here's the part that surprises people. After everything, the investigation, the court case, the title company confrontation, the hardest part wasn't any of that. The hardest part was going back to the ranch. I drove out there in November 2018, about 6 weeks after the TRO. Hector met me at the gate. The property looked different than I remembered. Not neglected exactly, but there was this feeling. Everything was quiet, still. We walked the fence line on the western boundary, the 40 acres Saul tried to sell. The grass was tall. One of the irrigation posts was leaning at a bad angle. Hector said, "Your daddy would have fixed that the same day he noticed it." I hired a property management firm to handle the day-to-day operations while the legal proceedings played out. I kept Hector on, paid him a 15% raise that should have happened 3 years earlier. He cried when I told him. This old cowboy, standing in the equipment shed, tears running into his mustache. He said, Wade would have done the same. By the spring of 2019, the ranch was stabilizing. I couldn't run it from Billings, not full-time, but I could manage the finances. That was, after all, what I did for a living. I restructured the trust, hired a real accountant, and set up quarterly audits. Every dollar in, every dollar out, documented and reviewed. The restitution money came back slowly. Saul had to sell the rental property in Laurel. After closing costs and fees, that recovered about $161,000. The rest, another $186,000, was structured in monthly payments, $2,100 a month for the next 7.5 years. I got a letter from my mother in February 2019. Not a phone call, a letter, written on her old cream-colored stationery. She said she'd reviewed the documents that my attorney had sent her. She said she was very sorry for the position this has put the family in. She didn't say she was sorry for not believing me. She didn't say Saul was wrong. She said she was sorry for the position. I wrote back, 1 line. The position was created by Saul, Mom, not by me. She called a week later. We talked for 40 minutes. She cried. I didn't. I was past crying about it. We weren't okay, but we were talking. And that was more than I expected. That spring, I planted a row of cottonwoods along the ranch's main drive. Dad always said he wanted to, but never got around to it. I ordered 12 saplings from a nursery in Buffalo. Hector and I spent a Saturday afternoon digging holes and getting them in the ground. My hands were blistered by the third tree, and I didn't care. Hector said, "You know, your daddy always said you were the strong one." I said, "Dad said I had a sharp eye." "That too," Hector said, "but he meant something more than numbers." It's 2024 now. 6 years since that day at the title company. The ranch is doing well, not booming. Ranching in Wyoming is never booming. But the herd is healthy, the finances are clean, and the hay operation cleared a profit of $41,000 last year for the first time since Dad got sick. I promoted Hector to ranch manager with a salary that actually reflects what he's worth. He still lives in the same foreman's cabin. Says he likes the view. I work remotely 3 days a week from a desk in the ranch house. The same house I grew up in. Same pine table where Saul told the family I was a thief. My mother comes out once a month for Sunday dinner. We have a relationship now. It's careful, specific. We talk about the weather, the cattle prices, whether the cottonwoods are growing straight. We don't talk about Saul unless she brings him up, and she rarely does. Saul lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Casper. He works at an auto parts store. Last I heard, he's still making his $2,100 monthly restitution payments. He's behind on 2 of them. His felony record means he can't manage property, can't hold a fiduciary position, can't serve as trustee for anything. The ranch, the place he ran for 9 years, the place he told everyone was his, is a 2-hour drive from his apartment, and he hasn't set foot on it since October 2018. He called me once, about a year ago. I answered. He said, "Lizzie, can we talk?" I said, "About what?" He said, I want to know if you're ever going to forgive me." I thought about that for a long time, longer than I probably should have on the phone. And I said, "I don't know, Saul, but I do know the restitution payment was due on the 15th, and it's the 22nd. He hung up.
Now, if you stayed through all of that, from the beginning to right here, I want you to know something. It took me a long time to tell this story out loud, not because of shame, because of exhaustion. Carrying a secret like that, knowing your brother stole from your father's legacy while blaming you, it's heavy. It's heavy in a way that doesn't go away even when the court case is over and the money starts coming back. But I'll tell you this. Every time someone hears this story and recognizes something in it, a brother who took too much, a mother who looked the other way, a system that only worked when someone finally demanded the receipts, every time that happens, the weight gets a little lighter. So if this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for the next person who needs to hear it. Share it, like it, leave a comment and tell me your story, because I know some of you have one. If there's a story here on this channel that you haven't listened to yet, go find it. I promise you, every one of them will make you feel less alone. And the last thing I'll say is this. My dad used to tell me, "Lizzie, the numbers don't lie. People do, but the numbers never do." He was right. He was always right about that. This is Lisbeth Nolan, Sheridan, Wyoming, and the numbers are clean. I eat breakfast at the pine table every morning now. Same seat my dad always sat in. Different kitchen. I rebuilt it myself. New cabinets, new countertop. Not a cent from the trust.